There's been great excitement over the last couple of days about arsenic, and particular arsenic and bacteria, because of a paper that's just been published in the journal Science. This paper is about bacteria that have been scooped out of the mud in a lake in California, Lake Mono, and they appear to be able to live using arsenic instead of phosphorus. And that is really quite surprising. And the reason why it's so surprising is because arsenic is well known as a poison. There's a book that was published this year which talks about the century of arsenic, how Victorian Britain was poisoned at home, work and play. And everybody, when they hear about arsenic, looks rather grim and thinks of poison. I've got a sample of arsenic here, which Neil brought to me, and he looked pretty grim. Wasn't sure whether he should be giving a professor some arsenic. And you can see, if I turn it round, you can see it's a greyish element. It's in the same group as phosphorus, group 15 of the periodic table. Phosphorus is essential to all life. The molecules that give us energy, ATP, contains phosphorus. Our very DNA has phosphorus in it. And so it was strongly believed that nothing could survive without phosphorus. So what these scientists did was that they got some bacteria from this lake in California which has really quite high levels of arsenic in the water. The bacteria in the mud, they reasoned, probably would not be killed by arsenic because there was a lot of arsenic in the water. So what they did was to take some bacteria out and start growing it in a dish, in solution in which they didn't add any phosphorus, but they added some arsenic. What they did is, after the bacteria had grown a bit, they poured away the water and transferred it to some new water which had even less phosphorus in it because they hadn't added any, and had more arsenic. And they did this several times. The surprising thing was that the bacteria still kept growing, but everybody would expect without phosphorus the bacteria wouldn't grow. It's well known that bacteria and algae grow really well if there's phosphorus in the water. But everybody thought no phosphorus, unhappy bacteria who couldn't divide, and so on. But what this experiment showed, or appears to show, because there's still some people who have slight doubt, is that the bacteria not only grew, and nobody can argue with that, but in the bacteria, inside the cells, you could find arsenic. Now the chemistry behind this depends, you can understand quite easily about DNA. You probably all know that DNA consists of two chains in a helix which are joined together by groups here, shown like by these T's, A's and so on. And this backbone of the chain consists of a mixture of a sugar, deoxyribose, that's the D, and phosphate. So phosphate is a group that has phosphorus in the middle and 4 oxygens around it. And the bacteria take in phosphate and incorporate it in the DNA, and each time a bacteria divides into 2 to make 2 new bacteria, they need to make more DNA, so they need more phosphate. So what appears to have happened in this case is that in absence of phosphorus, they have incorporated some arsenate, exactly the same molecule, 4 oxygens, but with arsenic instead of phosphorus. The reason people are so excited is because it overturns a belief that everybody has had before, that phosphate is essential to life, or phosphorus is essential to life, a so-called paradigm, that's something that all the scientists believe. The problem is, or has been up till now, that people thought that if there was an environment that did not contain phosphorus, life as we know it could not exist. So this restricts the areas in space or in the universe where life could develop. What this experiment seems to show is that as long as there is a group 5 element, then perhaps life could adapt. That is, the life as we know it is more flexible than we thought. If there isn't any phosphorus, then you could use arsenic, just like you might use concrete blocks instead of bricks when you're building your house if the bricks run out. May not look quite as beautiful, but it still works. Now, they haven't proved, for example, how much arsenic there is. It's not pure arsenical DNA, but it has some of it in there. And this is what's really surprising.
Like it was arsenic. We measured it as arsenic. And so let's look at an artist's rendition of what we think is going on in the cell. Let's roll that animation, please. So here we're seeing the beautiful, elegant structure of the double helix of DNA. And what I want to highlight is the phosphate backbone, we say, and that's the light orange balls. And it stitches together as we see the edges of DNA. It holds together the DNA, the backbone. And so what we think is happening, what all the evidence we've collected suggests, is that instead of these, we'll see these orange, light orange balls disappear. And represented by green balls, we see that arsenic would be substituting for phosphorus in the backbone of DNA. And you can see how critical this component of the DNA might be. So what I've presented to you today is a microbe doing something different than life as we knew it. I was taught as a biochemist that all life on Earth, all life we know of, to harken back to the pale blue dot ideas of Carl Sagan, all life we know of is here so far. And if there's an organism on Earth doing something different, we've cracked open the door to what's possible for life elsewhere in the universe. And that's profound, and to understand how life is formed and where life is going. This microbe substitutes arsenic for phosphorus in its basic biomolecules. And what else might we find? What else might we want to look for? Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Felice.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from sunny Tempe. It's a very exciting day. Congratulations to Felisa and her team on this really stimulating report that's coming out. And someone who's studied phosphorus for a long time, it's really quite surprising that we're having this discussion. So what I want to do for everyone, though, is try to place phosphorus in the context of ecology and the environment and evolution and how important it is for human beings in the operation of our society. So if I could just bring up the first slide there. So what we know from a lot of studies in ecology is that phosphorus is often limiting to the growth of all kinds of organisms, bacteria, algae, higher plants, even higher animals themselves. And this picture from the Tennessee Valley Authority shows quite clearly that phosphate added on the right-hand side of the picture is limiting also to crop plants. And so we add a lot of phosphorus in fertilizer, and in fact phosphorus-based fertilizers are one of the pillars of the green revolution. So phosphorus is limiting in a lot of different ecosystems, and it's limiting for the reasons that Felisa described, because life as we know it, organisms that we know around us, rely on phosphorus to build nucleic acids and other molecules that they need to grow and proliferate. So phosphorus is well known to be extremely important for all kinds of organisms and ecological systems. So if we're going on to the next one, because phosphorus is limiting and everything needs it, it often turns out also that when phosphorus leaks out of systems, like out of agricultural fields or out of cities or such, it functions as a pollutant. And here you can see a lake. On the bottom half has received phosphorus. The top side has only received carbon and nitrogen. The bottom side has received carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So phosphorus is necessary to have massive algal blooms that lead to the greening of lakes like this and eutrophication. So phosphorus is a big issue for sustainability and the quality of aquatic ecosystems. So we know that phosphorus, because it's limiting, because it's so important to organisms, often functions as a pollutant when it leaves human hands. Now we go on to the next slide. We can also start to talk about, well, where does this phosphorus come from that we use in fertilizer? Well, it comes from just a few places around Earth. It comes from mines of phosphorite deposits that were built up over tens of and hundreds of millions of years by biological processes. These mines are located in just a few countries around the world. The United States has phosphorus reserves in Florida and North Carolina that are rapidly being depleted because of fertilizer consumption. Morocco has major phosphorus reserves, as does China, but the distribution of this resource is relatively scarce around our planet. And so because of this scarcity and its geographic distribution, and because of the burgeoning demand for phosphorus fertilizer, there's some concern, and we can see the next slide, please, among scientists that the supplies of phosphorus that support the green revolution and high agricultural production might become scarce, at least supplies of cheap phosphorus. And so we need to get a lot cleverer about phosphorus in society, and it's really exciting to think about the possibilities that are raised by a clever organism that has evolved a way to do without phosphorus, possibly, as we're talking about today. So if we go on to the next slide. So as I think about the ramifications for the possibility of an organism that doesn't use phosphorus, the possibilities start to run away to think about how it might be used in wastewater treatment, how it might be used in recovering phosphorus from various sources, how it might be used in bioenergy production, and other sorts of possibilities. So really, we have a new way of thinking now, if this study holds up, that there are organisms that are possibly able to grow without phosphorus. And as someone who's studied phosphorus for my entire career, essentially, and who regularly gives lectures about phosphorus in which I state that every living thing uses phosphorus to build its DNA, the idea that I'm sitting here today discussing the possibility that that's not true is quite shocking. So, Felisa, I have to thank you and blame you for making our lives somewhat more difficult. So it really is quite a remarkable report in the context of what we know about phosphorus and its importance in ecosystems.
So what is really interesting about this result is if you can make a biomolecule that has substitutions in it, the properties have to change as a function of new constituents. So it opens up a whole new line of questioning. What might those changes be? What do they portend for the evolution of that chemistry? What do they mean about the environment? And by the same token, we might learn something new about habitable environments by understanding how organisms that are there adapt to the presence of new or limited chemical constituents. With respect to space exploration, this is a very interesting result again, because the implication is that we still don't know everything there is to know about what might make a habitable environment on another planet or a satellite of another planet. We have to increasingly broaden our perspective. So perhaps arsenic is not an essential component for habitability or for life, but it may be one that can be tolerated, and that opens up our perspective to try to understand what other potential components might be tolerated, or in fact even essential, that we presently haven't thought of.